welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about ways you can use embedded readings to scaffold text for your struggling readers. My name is Scott, and you're watching Immediate Immersion Live, where we're all about comprehension-based instruction in the modern language classroom. We'll be right back after this short intro. And welcome back. If you are new here, go ahead and type in hashtag newbie. And if you've been here before, go ahead and type in hashtag returnee. So today I want to talk about embedded reading. And embedded reading is something that was invented by both Laurie Clarcq and Michele Whaley. Both of them came up with the idea of embedded reading. And what's great about embedded reading is that it scaffolds texts, whether you're scaffolding down from a more advanced text or you're scaffolding up to a class-created text, both ways for your struggling readers to make the text more accessible. What embedded reading is, it starts off with the most essential part of a text, and then you add versions by adding sentences in between the other sentences to grow a bigger text. And that's why it's scaffold. So some texts usually have 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 versions. More complex texts, usually when you're taking from authentic texts, those would take a couple more versions to do it. So why would you want to use embedded reading? That's a good question. Embedded reading you want to use so that it takes a text that is more accessible to students and makes it more accessible to them. And so that's the benefit for it. So if I have a text that I think some of my readers, some of my class students won't understand, then I can simplify it and graduate the steps so that it gives them versions that are starting off very simple, moving up to more complex, until we get to the actual version that I would like them to be reading. And so that's why it's so important. Do I do it with every reading? I don't do it with every one, because some I think my students will understand the version I want them to understand. But there are times when I need to scaffold it, and I'll use embedded reading to do that. If you teach Spanish, Senor Whaley, if you're a subscriber of Senor Whaley, he has got lots of embedded readings for his stories that go along with his songs. So there's a resource there. You can also get a resource, and I'll type it here in the chat, at Laurie and Michele's website, embeddedreading.com. So you can go there. They have samples there, some more explanations. They have user-submitted embedded readings that you might be able to find for your language that you can use in your classroom. Now, there are 2 paths that you can do with embedded reading. The first is a text that the teacher has created. And then you can start off small and work your way up to that text. That's probably the most common way people use embedded reading. However, the other way, and the way that I really like doing it, is taking an authentic text that's obviously out of reach for most of my students and simplifying it so that they can understand it, and then we can work back up to the authentic text. This is something we do in one of our Spanish 2 units that we have. The students have to end up writing their own myth. And so we take a myth from, believe it's Ecuador. Could be wrong. Could be wrong there, but I think it's Ecuador. But it is a myth about how the quetzal bird is born, how it was created. And it talks about a Native American chief and his son is been told that when he was born that the fortune teller said that he will live forever, and then his uncle is really jealous and tries to find different ways to kill off the nephew because he wanted to become the chief. And the human body ends up dying in the story, but it talks about how it transforms into the quetzal bird, that the grass that the nephew is lying in turns into the green head and back of the bird. He dies with an arrow in his chest, and the blood that comes down off of the chest, that becomes the red part of the chest. And then the sunlight gives him all the different glows of the long, long tail. So we have that one, and we use 3 versions to be able to get down to the actual authentic one. Doug has asked what the story is called. It's El Quetzal no se muere nunca is the name of that one. And so we use that one in our Spanish 2s to get them ready for writing their own myth. And most of the actual myth that we read that is written in authentic text is accessible to the vast majority of my students. There are some specialized vocabulary, like for tribal chief and fortune teller, and some of the seeds of the tree that they use. Those are some specialized words. But even though they know 90% of the words and they could probably understand it, they don't have the confidence. Knowing that it was written for native speakers by native speakers, they don't have the confidence in that story. So by me taking it and bringing it down 2 more versions and starting out very, very slowly, it makes it much easier for them to understand. And Pablo says, gracias, profe. Todo esto me sirve para enseñar a mis alumnos. So he's saying, for those who don't speak Spanish, thank you, profe. All is helping me serve better to teach my students. Gracias, Pablo. So those are the 2 paths, and that's the one that I prefer doing because I usually write my text that I write for my class after level. So I don't usually have to scaffold them back. But I do like taking authentic texts and making them reachable to my struggling readers, especially classics. I take a section of Don Quixote in my level 1 that they will do when he is fighting the windmills, and I simplify it. I only do 2 or 3 paragraphs of the whole novel, and I simplify it. And it takes me about 6 or 7 versions because it's written in Shakespearean, 15th century, not 15th century, 15th century Spanish. So it's kind of like Shakespearean Spanish. So I've got to also cope with that. Plus, level 1 doesn't have much Spanish to begin with. So it really helps them to signal that down. Let's talk about how we do it. And I'm going to go over to a screen share. Let me switch over so we can see it here. Okay. Yes, Latin and Spanish have similarities. Latin is the language where Spanish originated from. Okay, so I'm going to go here and I'm just going to type in a Google Doc that we can all see. And I'm going to start with just a nice, simple version of a story. So let me go ahead and type that in here. We'll just do it in English so everybody can understand. There is a boy. The boy wants a dog. His parents say no. The boy is sad. So that could be your very, very first version of the story. It's 4 sentences. I write them vertically like this. I don't write them in a paragraph form so that they can see them and they are not scared off by them. And if I give them a bigger long text, they're going to say, I can't do this, you're struggling readers. But if I give them this text, they're like, well, I think I can do this one. It's much more simple. So the next thing we do is come up with the next version. So we don't just want to add sentences to the beginning or the end of the story. We want to embed them within there as well. So again, we're going to start off with there is a boy, but I'm going to add a couple sentences in there. The boy is 10 years old. The boy wants a big dog. He goes to his parents. His parents say no. He goes to his room. The boy is sad. So here is the second version. I tell my students, okay, if you can read this version, I only added a couple more sentences. One sentence, here we got this one sentence, 2 sentences, 3 sentences, and a word. That's all that I added. I'm like, if you can do this one, you can do the next one. And then we make another version. There is a boy. Oops, not boy. Scroll up here. There is a boy. The boy's name is John. John is 10 years old. John wants a big dog. Mia says, I love this way of teaching that makes it engaging and inclusive. How did you pick up on all of this? We learned it through a method called TPRS many, many years ago. There are workshops all over for comprehensible input, TPRS being the most common form of comprehensible input. Thank you, Mia. Okay, John wants a big black dog. Yes, Doug, better reading can be used in any language. John goes to his parents. He asks them for a dog. His parents say no. John goes to his room. He is sad and cries for 2 hours. So here again, we've added more sentences. We didn't just add them to the beginning or the end. We embedded them in there. And each version that we're getting to has more text to it, has more sentences, and gets more detailed. Pablo says, enseño una clase de idioma 2 en la escuela secundaria. Esto es realmente útil. De nada. He says he teaches a class of second language in a secondary school, and he says this is very useful for him. Awesome. So you can keep going as long as you want to get the versions. But what do you do with these versions? So let's just say this is the text I wanted my students to read, but I knew my struggling readers could not read that whole text. So then I made them this version, the simplest, and then I added this one. And I thought that's enough. They only need 3. But they need to be able to read those and do a different activity with each one so that it's not the same thing over and over again. Some teachers like to hide the ending and only show the ending in the final version. That's what I did with my authentic text. I didn't tell them the ending. It stopped right when he might be getting attacked, and it stops there. And they don't see the rest of it until we get to the final text. That gives them some anticipation. They're reading the 2 or 3 versions beforehand, and they still don't know the ending. They get the ending in the last version. And then we can scaffold that if we need to. So here we've got 3 versions. And let's say I'm handing out this version. They don't get any other version yet. They just see this one. I hand it out on a piece of paper, and I say, I want you to highlight any words you don't know. That's one thing I could have them do with it. So they can go and underline, circle, or highlight whatever they want, any words that they don't know in the text. Or I can do what's called stoplight reading, where they're going to go through each sentence and highlight the sentence red, yellow, or green, depending on if they understood it, it's green. If they didn't understand it, it's red. And if they understood it but with some struggle, it's yellow. So those are 2 of the ones I usually do for the beginning. It depends on the length of the text. But I can get a good read by looking at what they did. How much of this did they understand and how much didn't? What words do they still need? Or what sentences are they having trouble with? Pablo says, a veces mis alumnos se cansan un poco a mitad de clase. ¿Hay algo que pueda hacer para ayudar? Yes, we did one of these lives a couple weeks ago on brain breaks. So I would suggest going to my channel and then look for the brain break video under past lives. And then that will, es un descanso para el cerebro. And I give you my top 10 ones that I do to break up the class. Great question, Pablo. So then for my second one, if I only had them do the vocabulary on the first one, then I probably would have them do the stoplight reading for the second one. If not, if I had them do the stoplight reading for the first one, de nada, Pablo. Then the next one I would have them do is probably go, and I would have them maybe work with a partner, and they can translate it together, working together. So where one doesn't know a word, the other one does. That can help them out. Usually in this case, I would have them translate alternating sentences. So the first student would do the first sentence, then the second sentence would be the second student, etc. And they would go back and forth. Another thing you can do is you can cut these sentences up and have them put them back in order. So scramble them up, make little sentence strips, put the kids in groups, and then they can go ahead and re-put them back into order that makes sense. And there might be some variation, like when we get down to the boy's name and John is 10 years old, sometimes the sentences can go either way. James, we're not here to teach language. That you can search other places for that. This is for learning how to teach languages. Hey, Steven. Steven says, I'm arriving late. Thanks so much. Did you talk about doing this with song lyrics? I haven't talked about doing with song lyrics, but that's another option. I don't usually do it with song lyrics unless it's Sing Your Wooly, because they're already pre-created. But that's another thing. It's an authentic text like we talked about earlier. So taking that authentic text and simplifying it. And Stephen brings up a good point. Song lyrics, number one, are going to use some common vocabulary or slang that students don't know. And two, it's like in poetic language. And so the words aren't in natural order, so you have to explain that. So yes, songs is another one that you can do it for, as I said. It's an authentic text, so it goes under that second category that we talked about. And so they can do this, as I said, the word scramble, where they unscramble the sentences and put them in the proper order. Another thing you can have them do, especially in the final version, is ask them comprehension questions. But I want my comprehension questions to be in the common language. So if the text is in French and the kids their common language is English, and the questions would be in English. If it's English, you're teaching students English and the common language is German, then your questions would be in German. And the reason for this is I don't want them to get confused on the questions. If the questions are already in their own language, they're not going to get confused on the questions, and they can really just focus on the language that they're learning, the text of that. So those are some ideas of things you can do with text. There's lots of different things. Illustrating is another one where they can draw out what's happening, like on a storyboard. They can explain what's happening to another student in their own words in the target language. That's another option. So there's lots of different things that you can do. And if you just do a Google search for reading activities, you'll find a huge list that you can use. So that's how you do it. Now, some additional resources. I shared a little bit with you. I'll go and put it back up here. embeddedreading.com. That's the main website. And actually, why don't I go ahead and come back here. Let me do it here. Let me go back to our screen share. So here is the website. So embedded reading, they've got the information about embedded reading here. They've got a calendar of workshops and training. Stephen says, I think I need to try to do more of this. Yes, as I said, you missed Stephen. You can go back and watch in the replay. But I talked where my favorite one is taking from authentic texts and making them accessible to all my students. That's my favorite way to doing that. And Pablo says, mismo, the same. Here's regional PLC groups for TPRS teaching comprehensible input teachers, other training, and then there's got, I keep trying to scroll on the wrong page. So here you can see all the things that are in here, and you can go into the archives, and there are samples of different languages. So if you teach Chinese, you can click here, and it has different ones that you can get. I don't know. Oh, it's a file. I thought it was going to be a link I could do. Joaquín dice... Joaquín says, ¿cómo enseñas a los estudiantes que no entienden una versión de una historia en lectura integrada? So, that's when you're going to scaffold it down. He's asking, what do you do for students who don't understand a version of the story? So, you got to know your students, and you find out the lowest common denominator. Who's the most struggling of your readers? And that first version needs to address them. It may be too simple for all the rest of your classes, but it addresses them. That's where you always start. That's a great question, Joaquin. That's where we're going to start from, is you look at your class. In any class, you look at who your most struggling reader is, and you write that first version directly from them. If you simplified it and they still can't understand it, you simplified it as much as you can, then while everybody else is working independently, you can go work with that student or that small group of students together. You can also further scaffold only their version. So let's go back to my thing here for an example. So I could, in this very first version, if I already know that my most struggling reader is having trouble, I can go ahead and just his version, nobody else's version, just his, I can go and put in parentheses, let's say I'm teaching an English class for Spanish speakers, so then I'm going to write in parentheses, this is Chico. And then I'm going to go down here. Oh, they're going to struggle. They know dog, but they're going to struggle with this verb, quiere. And they don't know the word say, so I'm going to write dice. These are words that all my other kids know, but just this kid or these few kids don't know. Now, I like to gloss my text in parentheses right next to the word, because struggling readers also have another problem. If the other problem would be that they can't follow. So if they're looking at the text and then they got to go to the bottom to see what the footnote is, and then they go back, they can't find where they left off. So they start back at the beginning. A lot of struggling readers have this problem. So by putting the translation right next to the word, they don't have to move up and down. They can keep on reading in a line. Doug asks, what if they don't understand any of it? Then you haven't simplified it down enough, or the student may be in the wrong class. Most of our level ones could do this one right away in Spanish, and in French too, in our level 1 Frenches. These would not be very difficult for them to be able to do, maybe after 3 or 4 weeks of instruction. You don't want to do it too early in their instruction either. Okay, so let's go back to our embedded readings. So you can find samples of embedded readings here. There's Latin, German, there's frequently asked questions. They've got lots of different resources here. And Stephen makes a good point. I would start and do total physical response with vocab before the story, maybe. That's true. When I'm writing the stories, though, I know what they should know, and so I'm writing to my students. I'm not using a reading that I created for another group of students in a previous year. I write my story directly for the students that I'm teaching that year and that period. So I usually don't have to go back and reteach or pre-teach the vocabulary, because if it's not something I think they would know, then I'm not going to put it in the story. Or if I do and I need that word, like I wrote a story one time about a llama spitting. My kids loved llamas. They wanted me to talk about llamas, so I did that. They didn't know the word for spit, so it was important to the story. I needed it, and I needed them to know it, so I just put it in parentheses so they knew that word meant spit. And that way, it wasn't a problem. But if your basic of sentences, way down here, if this is difficult for your students, then you need to rethink. If it's difficult for the average student, then you're either doing it too soon or you're doing it too early. They need more input to be able to do that. But if it's only for a couple of students, then I would do this. I would scaffold it this way. I wouldn't do TPR with if it was only 2 or 3 students who were struggling with this. I would work with them in a group by themselves while the other kids are working with partners or independently on the rest of it. That's what I would do. But if the story that you're writing has lots of unknown vocabulary, then perhaps using total physical response to teach the vocabulary would be helpful. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Stephen. The other place, and it only works if you teach Spanish, unfortunately. I know he's working on French materials. But Senor Whaley, and this is where Stephen also was talking about using music. He was talking more probably authentic music, but you can also do it with Senor Whaley. He's done it already. So you can go in, if you have an account with him, you can go to one of his songs. So let's just pick La Dentista. They've got the videos. They've got the lyrics. They've got information about it. So it's got, out of the 4-pepper scale, it's 2 peppers. It says it's for middle school and up. You can look and see what grammar is in there. Any teacher notes. Themes that are in there. You can read all through that. Nuggets are assignments that you give students to do. But under resources, you can see here that they've got the embedded readings. So I can click open. And they have the embedded readings. Yes, I would recommend these videos as a good learning resource and tool. I use them in my classroom all the time. So here you can see that that he's written them for different people. So we've got beginner stories, intermediate stories, and advanced stories. Joaquín dice, realmente me gustan tus ideas sobre la lectura incrustada, pero ¿cómo se te ocurren estas historias? Es tuyo, no es hecho por alguien más. Perdón por los errores ortográficos. So, I make up a lot of my stories for my students. Or you can go to embeddedreading.com and find them. Or resources here, like I'm showing right here for Senor Whaley. So if I scroll down, he's got the different versions. So here's one that tells the story in 59 words. There's a girl. The girl lives in Chicago. One day she wakes up. She looked at the calendar. It was the day of her dentist appointment. Her mom said, "You have to go. I think you have a cavity." The girl didn't want to go to the dentist. The girl and her mother went to the dentist. The dentist entered the office. So now in this one, he's left off the ending of the story. He's not put it in there. Then he's got a second version, and this one has 109 words to it. And there's a third version, still beginners. It's a 189 word version. And then he's got the long version, which has 241 words, but it's still written for the beginning level student. And then we've got the extended version, which is 292 words, still written for the beginning student. Okay. Now we have intermediate for your intermediate students. Here's one from 156 words. So he's written them for students of different levels, and you can find not only the level, but also how many words that you want to use. And these are already pre-made. Otherwise, I generally write my own stories. I use my students in my class to write stories about, and then I include those in embedded readings or other types of texts. That's where I get all my stories. So, with that, let me go back to our main spot here. Those are all of the things that I have to say about embedded reading. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add or ask any questions? While you're doing that, if you want to learn more about the method that I use to teach, I have a course called the Webversity course that you can register for and get training on the methods that I use in my classroom. You can do so at mm.us/webversity. And we have 3 versions of that program. We have the basic version, we have intermediate version, and then an advanced version. And so the basic version includes just 8 basic lessons. Then we add some more lessons in the middle version. And then the last version has all of the lessons in there. You get all the basics with the basic one. But if you want to learn more, each level has different videos in it that you can watch. And it is a self-paced program. Okay, if there are no other questions, I will let all of you go. Next week, we're going to be talking about building student relationships with an app called flip.com. So I hope to see you next week on Monday. Joaquín dice, ¿esos videos son gratis? No son gratis, lo siento. Tiene que pagar, pero no es mucho. Y depende en cualquier nivel quieres. You're very welcome, Stephen. I'll hope to see you next week. And with that, I will say goodbye, everybody. Have a great